Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. In each episode, we invite guests to have honest conversations about their mental health journeys with the goal of destigmatizing mental health within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Due to the nature of the podcast, we'll be discussing a variety of mental health topics and possibly triggering experiences. While we and the majority of our guests are not trained professionals, we encourage you to practice self-care while listening and seek professional guidance if you or a loved one is in need of support. With that said, let's start the episode.
Hello, my name is Courtland Shimada, and I would describe my mental health journey as rewarding.
Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Matthew Yonamura. Welcome to the Changing Tides podcast, the very first episode. Super excited to get this going and to share these interviews with you. You'll get to know more about me in the next episode, but before you get to know me, it's really important for you to get to know Changing Tides. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the interview. This is with one of our founding members of Changing Tides. She has recently taken a step back from it just because she's pursuing her master's degree in social work, actually, so that she could continue and make more waves in this world. So let's get into the interview with Courtland Shimada. So, Courtland, thank you for coming to the podcast. Obviously, you've been very involved with Changing Tides, so you kind of know everything that we've been doing here. But you said rewarding. So could you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, I think any mental health journey is tough at times and difficult to navigate, but I think once you really start taking that journey, it is rewarding. Like you see um, improvements and you see like just a lot of joy, I think, from like learning about yourself, learning about how others deal with their mental health. Um, and I think for me, at least, like it's really built a strong community. Just being able to talk about mental health and work on things like Changing Tides has really allowed me to cultivate a really really cool community. So yeah, I think that's the most rewarding part.
For sure. When would you say your personal mental health journey began?
I would say, um, I mean, I think having a mother who is a social worker kind of um, allowed that space to kind of be explored early in my life. In high school and actually in middle school, there were people around me who were struggling with mental health illnesses and various issues. And so, in that regard, I was kind of exposed to it in kind of a tangential way. Um, and I really was grateful, like looking back, I'm really grateful that my parents were pretty open about talking about mental health things because I think it helped me process what my friends were going through. Um, and so, kind of because of that, I got interested in doing mental health work in high school. Um, and from that point on, just kind of pursued, um, yeah, work in this field.
So that's interesting for a couple of reasons. So one, when you said middle school, that's surprising because I feel like those types of conversations, even if you're experiencing it, they don't come up often that early. So, um, if you don't mind, or if it's okay with you, like how did those conversations come up in middle school? Was it like very clearly like, oh, I have a mental health issue, or was it like hints at mental health issues?
I think it started with hints. I was also lucky to have a pretty close group of friends growing up. And so there were things that we noticed when issues would arise. Um, I mean, I think at that age, right, like eating disorders can be pretty common, and we saw that a lot. We also saw some self harm. And so, again, like these are things that I would see in my friends. And in the beginning, we kind of have to figure out for myself, like, is this something I tell an adult about, or is this something that, I just try to support my friends with? Um, and eventually, these are things that I would bring to my mom, and having her support in that area was really beneficial.
That it's interesting because I know, like, from my own experiences that I had some tough times in middle school, but I feel like when adults or like maybe outside looking in, middle school
Mhm.
seems like a time when it wouldn't be high stakes as far as the comments people are making. But middle school
Mhm.
is really a fragile time for a lot of people. So
Mhm.
self harm, now that I think about it, that was a prevalent thing in middle school. That was when a lot of us were starting to get on Facebook, or comment sections on apps were becoming a thing. So I'm sure it's
Mhm.
still prevalent for middle schoolers now, but middle school was a tough time for a lot of people. That's when you're developing, and every comment, it's hard to digest them. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that you've brought it to surface because I don't think many people think about it.
Yeah, that's so true. I think, like you said, like the period of a lot of change, right? And so it makes sense for kids to be struggling with things, even things that might not seem like big issues, but can, I think, develop into bigger issues down the road. Um, yeah, I think it's definitely an area where support is needed.
So you said that it was middle school through high school. That's when your journey really began. But then you really started to find or hit your groove with Changing Tides, as far as advocating for others and having that bigger platform. Of course, you're able to help your friends, but Changing Tides elevates your platform, and you brought in people to help you. So um, through Changing Tides, your family, as you said, has been really supportive. How did you begin to open up conversations about mental health with, your family and your peers first and foremost?
Yeah. Um, it's interesting because I think for me, the motivating factor for Changing Tides, or kind of this idea of having support within the community, really, I can pinpoint one moment in college when I was having a conversation with a friend who um, just kind of was really avoiding some of the things that he was going through. And when I suggested or offered to go with this person to like our counseling and psychological services at UCLA, um, this kid just completely shut it down. He was like, "We don't do that in the J community. Like, that's not our thing. We don't talk to our parents about that." Um, which ironically, I do talk to my parents about. So I remember bringing this to my mom, and we still debate how the concept for Changing Tides came about. But I think it's through those conversations that we were having about like what I was seeing at school, as well as what she was seeing working at LCSC. Um, and out of those conversations grew what Changing Tides is today. And so, yeah, with my mom, it's always been very open. With my dad, it's been pretty open as well. I think, especially since he's seen the work that we do with Changing Tides, he asks some questions and I think has a better idea now of kind of why we do this, which is great. Um, my brother is very open about mental health with me and with our family. And I think in some ways he really inspires like myself and other family members to be more open and to kind of express what we're feeling and when we need help. Um, so, and that started after Changing Tides um, started. So it wasn't until he started talking about his mental health struggles that I also talked about my mental health struggles with my family, despite the fact that I was already doing advocacy work, Changing Tides.
That's it's cool because you and I are both like very lucky in the sense that we have JA families that are very willing to talk about mental health.
Hmm.
So there's kind of two parts, but I'll ask the first question before the other. Because of that experience that you have, where you have this open family, was it hard for you to find the middle ground or how to communicate with people who didn't have that type of upbringing?
That's a good question. um, I think I've always been aware of the different ways in which families address mental health. Um, I didn't recognize how deep the stigma was rooted until our work with Changing Tides. Um, it wasn't until we were starting to have these conversations with people who um, were family friends and are now very close to us, but it wasn't until we were having those conversations that I realized just how much of a lack of knowledge there was, how much of a generational gap there was. Um, so yeah, it's not something that I was fully aware of, I would say, until really getting into those conversations through Changing Tides.
So, second part of the question. Um, so I know your brother. Me and him are great friends.
Yes,
It's
yes.
interesting because well, first of all, me and Kenji weren't didn't get along when we were little, which is funny. But
But
um,
I didn't know that.
so okay, I'll tell this story really quickly. I don't remember what the reason for it was, but when we were like little, like elementary school, there was some argument we got into after a game, and my reaction to whatever he said was to push him into a fence. Wrong move. We were little kids, little kids. But then I remember he, your mom told my mom like later or like eventually like later on that after that moment in the car, he it was like silent that he just says, "I'm not Matthew's friend anymore."
Oh no.
Yeah. And it was when we were really little, but so luckily we were able to get past it. But but like when we became friends and as our friendship developed, he wasn't super vocal about his feelings or anything like that. But I do think that there's this idea of like mutual family benefit in like one little moment that like maybe you showed him helped him open up, and then it went back and forth, because he'll come to me and say like, hey, how, like he'll come to me and Gabe and he'll be like, hey, how do you guys deal with A or B? Like, so that wasn't so much a question as much as it was just to say, I think that you have as much credit in him developing the ability to talk about mental health as he benefits you. So I just wanted to say that.
Mm. Well, thank you for saying that. I think, yeah, I'm sure you see it within your own family too, right? In having these conversations with your dad, with your parents. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's one of those things where once you start to open a conversation and each party kind of opens it a little bit more, that's kind of where the work starts to really happen.
So obviously, part of the rewarding part is changing tides.
Mhm.
But could you dive into a little bit of like what inspired you to start changing tides in the first place?
Yeah. So it really began in college, actually, I think. I was doing a lot of mental health work. I was a psychology major and was volunteering with different groups on campus. But I remember having conversations specifically within the Asian American community about how um, it was still very stigmatized to address your own mental health. So we could talk about, mental health as a thing, mental health as an illness that's valid, but we couldn't talk about it in relation to ourselves. Like that was just kind of a no-no. So my mom, who's director of social services at Little Tokyo Service Center, and I would have these conversations about what we could do to kind of, mitigate that stigma and really start opening new conversations. And so, yeah, that's kind of how the concept of addressing mental health kind of started, and that eventually rolled into what Changing Tides is today.
Very cool. And would you say like were you battling were you battling your own mental health issues when you decided to go about it, or were you just realizing overarching that there wasn't any programs or any conversation within the AAPI community?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. Um, you know, I was really lucky to have people in my circle who I could talk to about mental health and who are kind of going through similar things. Um, Ty and Max are two people who I like can think of specifically who throughout college I would talk to about like anxiety or depression or things that kind of came about, while we were working really hard in undergrad. And so it was really natural to kind of include both of them into what Changing Tides is today, because we already had that kind of trust and that familiarity.
Cool. And that kind of jumps into the next question, because so you have the idea for Changing Tides. You and your mom were having these conversations. You just mentioned Max and Ty. So what was the next step after the idea?
Yeah, so it actually really just started with a single event. We weren't really sure what the community was going to think about Changing Tides, or if they were going to be receptive to talking about mental health. And so we just kind of said, let's just start with one event. And so that was what became Changing Tides May event year one, which was really cool. It came together in like 5 months maybe, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. And obviously it took place at Carolyn Elliott's house, and it was just an amazing event. Ty spoke at that event. And so it was really cool. We ended up having so much support from all different types of people who we never expected to be kind of open to at least thinking about mental health. So yeah, that's kind of where it started. And with that event too, we had a strong art component. So, that's kind of how art really became a huge focus for Changing Tides. Within that event, we also had like the two different committees. So we had like a great big committee that was very intergenerational, and people from all different backgrounds, different professions and experiences. And then we also had like what eventually became the crew, which was like the younger crowd. And so we were put in charge of more of like the art component and like the fun aspects of the event. And then after that, we kind of just took off on our own.
And okay, so a couple things.
Mm-hmm.
So first, besides, I'm guessing it was you, Max, and Ty, and the original crew.
And Taryn Hara.
Okay,
Yeah.
Gotcha. So it was just the four of you that put on the May event?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. And so I'm a new crew member. So with that, and because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to either attend or plan the May event.
Mm.
So could you dive a little bit into what exactly the May event was, and how that projected the rest of Changing Tides to continue and grow?
Yeah, that's so true. I keep forgetting that you haven't been to a May event. It's so wild.
Yeah, I thought the very first event was the paint night.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that was my first introduction to Changing Tides.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So the May event is an event that happens in May, and we have not found a better name for it, because the original name of it was Changing Tides.
Okay.
So Changing Tides is technically both the name of an event, but also of now a program of Little Tokyo Service Center. So the original May event really was, we wanted to keep it short and simple. So I believe we had 2 speakers. Ty was one of them. And then we had an older woman who spoke Japanese and kind of shared her story as well. And then we had performances. So we had a musical performance. We also had, like I mentioned, like a really cool art component. So we had one of the community artists based out of Little Tokyo. She helped us create what eventually became like the little giveaways that we gave to everyone, and also had a really strong, she painted these really cool pieces for us as well. And so it was really this like multifaceted event that was very like kind of open and free flowing in ways where we can just allow people to come into the space and experience mental health and mental health advocacy as they wanted to. So yeah, that was really the first May event. And since then it's kind of followed a similar pattern of having really amazing speakers and artists and performers just kind of come together for a night to think and talk about mental health.
Very cool. Because so that's really interesting to me, because obviously mental health could be approached in so many different ways, and advocacy for it can be approached in so many different ways. So what about the components that came into the May event? What made the crew and the intergenerational committee decide, hey, this May event is maybe the best way for us to get this going?
Yeah, I think it really began with us like not being sure how people would approach mental health as a topic. And at the same time knowing that this format of like an evening where there's food and alcohol and, and performers and people from all different backgrounds is kind of like a familiar format for a lot of people. This kind of this event where you go to for a day and then you can leave. It's a very familiar. So instead of having like, you know, us all sit around in a circle and just talk about mental health and our feelings, we wanted it to be a little bit more approachable for people. So yeah, that's kind of how we decided on that.
And I think having like certain speakers open up that felt comfortable enough to open up, that's huge because, you know, I think a lot of people all feel the same stuff, but everyone's afraid to bring it up.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I have my own mental health story, and with that, like, I noticed when I was comfortable enough to open up, that's when other people felt the same because everyone's just afraid to be like, hey, like, do you feel this way too? So I think having those speakers and that helps open up the dialogue. So what year was the first May event?
So the first May event was 2018, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's another thing. Like, how do you think the landscape, have you seen a landscape change? Not to say Changing Tides necessarily started the entire nationwide change in mental health and the way we approach it. But ever since then, have you noticed a change in how, you know, outside of the AAPI community, but nationwide is approaching mental health?
Yeah, I think so. We always talk about how we kind of started at maybe the right time, if there is a right time. In terms of, I think we really formed Changing Tides at a time when people were starting to become more accepting of talking about mental health directly, and being more open about that conversation, which I think really helped us to grow in ways, because if it wasn't as accepted in society as it is right now, like I don't think we would have gained all the traction that we did in the way that we did. So yeah, I think it was definitely a timing thing for us as well.
Oh, cool. Yeah, because, you know, one thing that we have all discussed is like Kevin Love talking about mental health, like for professional athletes, male athletes at that. And, you know, there's this whole macho stigma around mental health, and that's a thing with so many different cultures and people of color. Like they all have their different phrases and ways of describing, like, hey, men for whatever reason aren't supposed to open up about mental health. But, you know, there's just been so many different groups of people opening up. So I think that's really great. Yeah, I think Changing Tides did come at a perfect time. But so with that and with the May event all in mind, is there a particular moment, even if it's not like a big planned event, that stands out that you're most proud of with Changing Tides?
Oh man, there have been so many, honestly. Like I think, yeah, there have just been so many moments that I've been like so proud of Changing Tides, of the crew, of just the whole concept of it. But I think two moments that really stick out in my mind are first the 341 pop-up. So that was this space in Little Tokyo that was kind of used as like a rotating open space for the community where different orgs or businesses would come in and set up shop there. And so for the month of February 2019, we were able to go in and set up whatever we wanted for Changing Tides. And that was wild. We got notice of it like, I think 3 weeks before we wanted to open it. So we decided that we wanted to do an art gallery that represented different artists' interpretation of mental health and their mental health journey. So within a span of 3 weeks, we like broke down the space, set it up as we wanted to, got artists to submit their pieces, and had like an opening day, which was wild. It was like so many all-nighters and just an incredible amount of work that the crew put in. And so throughout that whole month, I was just really proud of like all the work that went into it and how dedicated everyone was. And also throughout the month, I think we got a lot of like people just coming into the space to explore and look at the pieces and talk about mental health, which is really all we really want. So that was really cool. And then the second event was probably the conference. So the conference was a one-day event in the fall of 2019. And that was held at the Japanese American National Museum. And it was just like a bunch of speakers, a bunch of artists, experts, people that we have built connections with over the years. Your father being one, of people who were super open to sharing their stories or their journeys. And, we put them on panels and had them present different things. And it was a really, really cool intergenerational just kind of mix of everything that I think represented Changing Tides up to that point. So that was really cool.
Very cool. I'm also curious about any like little moment outside of the work that made you proud that you just remember, like, as you mentioned, the late nights, the all-nighters you had with the crew. Is there anything that stood out to you that you remember on and it's just like, that it just stands out as a funny moment?
Yeah, a funny moment. Oh my goodness, we've had so many. Okay, again, there are two of these. The first, I think, was the first real crew meeting that we ever had, actually. It was a 7-hour meeting, I think, that we had at my house that like was kind of random. We didn't know that it was going to last for 7 hours, but this was at a time when it was me, Max, Ty, Katie, Moet, and Taryn, I think, was also there. And so we all just kind of like sat around my kitchen and talked about what we wanted the future of Changing Tides to look like. And spent a lot of time just like going back and forth with the logo, even the name of Changing Tides was something that we talked about for hours. And so I think like, not to like be proud of us working on something that was potentially very stressful and difficult, but like I think it was more the fact that like we were all so committed to this thing and we're really enjoying it and putting in so many hours and not wanting to like rip each other's heads off was really, really cool to me. And then I think similarly to kind of like bookend that experience, when you and Yua both joined the crew, we had a meeting over the summer, and I just remember it was a Zoom meeting, and I remember thinking, Max and I were going off to school. We were kind of going to take a step back from the crew at that point. And I just remember being like so like excited for the future of Changing Tides, knowing that it was going to be in really good hands and that this thing that we kind of created together was going to continue beyond us. So, yeah.
I'm honored. That's really sweet. And also you did mention the logo and the name, but I'll save a very certain question for Ty.
Oh, yes.
We're taking a quick break to introduce Anchor, the sponsor of this podcast. Anchor is free, first and foremost, which is amazing. Who doesn't love free? And you can record everything directly into Anchor. It's so easy to use Anchor. That's how you are listening to this podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple, the Anchor website. You're listening to it because I uploaded this podcast episode to Anchor. If you want to start your own podcast, I highly recommend Anchor. It's made this whole process so easy. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Last year, you moved to New York to pursue your master's in social work at Columbia. Did your work at Changing Tides inspire you to pursue your career in social services and mental health field, or because I know your mom also works as in social work, so I'm curious, was Changing Tides just like the next, I guess like it proved to you that it was something that you wanted to do, or what was the real inspiration for you to go back to school?
Yeah, definitely. Changing Tides was definitely a motivating factor. I remember around the time I decided to go back to school was when we were doing our pop-up art exhibition in Little Tokyo. And it was awesome. It was a partnership with JANM and Changing Tides. And pretty much, 2 or 3 times a week, I'd be at the space just kind of hanging out amongst the art, welcoming in guests and strangers into the space to kind of explore. But there were definitely moments throughout that experience where people would come to me or to other members of the Changing Tides crew and just wanting to share their story or wanting extra help with certain things. Um, and some of those things we could handle on our own, but we quickly began to realize that some of these things we couldn't, and we needed kind of more of a professional lens on things. So that was kind of a huge motivating factor for me to think, how can I deepen the work that I do? Um, and the answer to that was really to just get another degree. With social work, in order to get licensed, you have to go through the master's program. And so I think being around a lot of social workers during my time at LTSC was also a good push towards social work for me.
That's really cool to hear because you could have very easily said, changing tides as it is, it's great. Like we're doing what we need to do. But it's awesome that you were decided, hey, like we could do more, I could do more, and then it resulted in you going back to school. So I think that pursuit for like what else more can we do was really special. But with that,
Yeah.
as you're now, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add too, like, I think also it was a huge motivating factor for myself. And you're right. Like, I think there was the option to just continue in my trajectory without going to grad school, because really it's not just me who's who's pursuing professional mental health within Changing Tides. Like we have a mental health advisory board, and that's full of professionals who assist us with everything that we do. I think it was really just like, it was eye-opening for me to see a different side of the work that we were doing at Changing Tides, and realizing that I couldn't do that was kind of frustrating for me personally. So I think, yeah, that's kind of the spark.
So you're now almost done with your first year of your program.
Yeah.
How has your education impacted your knowledge on social service and mental health? Of course, there's still another year you have. You don't know it all yet. You're getting there. But how do you hope
Mhm.
to apply what you're learning? And how has this experience of going back to school, like, have you already realized the benefit of it?
Yeah. I would say with social work programs, at least one that I'm in, the biggest, um, the area that I'm learning the most in is our like field experience. So actually being out and working with, in my case, I work at a high school, so I work with students one-on-one. Um, and I have supervision for that. So I have an amazing supervisor. I have fellow interns who I can also bounce ideas off of. And so that for me is like where the core of the learning is, in terms of like direct services. In terms of more of like the actual in-class education aspect, I think a lot of that is kind of what you take what you want from it. And so for me, it's been a lot of learning about more of a macro lens in social work. And that means kind of, stepping back from direct services, how do a lot more of the systemic issues that surround our clients, how do those things play into their lives? And how can we be advocates for them directly with them and also in these bigger systems? So that's been a huge learning point for me. I think it's also changed what I, initially thought I was going to do going into grad school. I thought I was going to do more of the direct clinical route. And I'm realizing now that I kind of want a bit of both. I want to get licensed and have clinical experience, but I also want to be able to work on a bit more of a wider scale. So whether that means working with organizations or doing more programmatic things, kind of like what we do with Changing Tides. That's also an area that I'm really interested in.
Was it hard for you to decide, like, hey, maybe I need to take a step back, and like what made you decide, even though this Changing Tides is growing and evolving and it's going in a fantastic direction, what made you decide it might be best for me to take a step back?
Yeah, so it was actually a really long process that was intentional, and we put a lot of thought into it. We actually ended up having a lot of group sessions with a therapist who specialized in working with groups and nonprofits, and it was it was cool. We got to talk about what we each wanted in terms of the future of Changing Tides and where we saw it going. You know, if we saw it continuing at all was a question. Because we definitely got to a point, I think, where we were all starting to get a little burnt out. You know, the crew is all very much so volunteer based. And so most of the work that we do is just because we really want to do it and we're really passionate about it. But to an extent that can lead to, I think, it's stressful and exhausting at times. And so the question was like, how are we going to make this sustainable? And so it was a lot of conversations and discussions about what the future looked like. And then from that, we talked about how Max and I were going to be going off to school. Other members of the crew are probably going to be going off to grad school or getting full-time jobs eventually. So what does that look like? But I think at the end of the day, we all decided that this is something we didn't want to let go of. We wanted to really commit to making sure it was sustainable and could carry on. So that's when we decided to bring on more crew members like yourself, and we brought on Rain, who is now the coordinator of Changing Tides, who is our LTSC kind of like liaison / leader of Changing Tides now, which has been super, super helpful in kind of like creating that continuity. And so I think after all of that work that we put into it and like having a plan and setting all of that up, I think I at least felt a lot more comfortable taking a step back, and, you know, really seeing it as not really like my thing at all. Really, it's a crew thing. So I was really happy to kind of see it continue without me, I think.
Okay, very cool. And I think maybe in a weird way, the pandemic might have like helped with the burnout, because maybe the rest of the crew that is remaining on board for the time being, they had a chance to, you know, take a step back as well, just because everything was forced to slow down. Like I still have no idea what goes into planning the May event, and I'm sure that's where it gets tough. So maybe in like 2021 May, maybe 2022, who knows? But yeah, I'm sure maybe this was a weird like chance for everyone to get a break.
Yeah, for sure.
So master's degree in social work, off to New York for school. What is next for you?
That's a great question. And one that I'm not sure I know the answer to at the moment. But I think having worked with Changing Tides for so long, I do want to have a position or be in a position where I can continue similar work. So whether that's working in community or kind of working in more of like an intergenerational space, but still having like that hands-on mental health work as well. So yeah, you know, I'm hoping that with more experience in school and staying connected to Changing Tides, I'll be able to figure it out once I graduate.
Cool. We are back. We took a quick break just to make sure everything was still rolling. And all the questions, for the most part, I sent to Cortland in advance. But now I want to surprise you with a little quick fire segment. So, obviously, you could take some thought, but I just wanted to like make you freestyle a little bit.
Okay.
So, if you could only listen to one album for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh man. Probably Taylor Swift's Red album.
Okay.
Is the first one that comes to mind. Yeah.
Okay, so just a little side note. I've known you since I was in first grade.
Yeah.
So, and I always thought it was, and I know you because of your brother. And like, I remember finding out that he was a big Taylor Swift fan at one point, and then it like was a family thing.
Yeah.
I just did not peg you guys for big, what do you call yourselves, Swifties?
Swifties?
I did not peg you guys for big Swifties.
Yes. I mean, I think she was just a strong presence in the, 2000s.
Fair.
Mid to early 2000s. And so, yeah, it's been, I think her Red album really defined a lot of my high school experience. So
okay,
gotta
very
pick that
interesting.
one.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that paints a picture of high school Cortland too.
Yeah,
All
for
right,
sure.
Cool. So next, if you could invite 5 people to dinner, dead or alive, who would they be?
Wait, 5 people?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a good question. Um, I don't know. I think I think I would honestly, okay, if I could have one dinner, just any dinner and have anyone there,
Okay.
honestly, I think I'd choose my family, which is
Wow.
like such a cheesy thing to say, but like having moved away and
Oh,
being in the cold and not having like home cooked meals constantly, yeah.
that might be the sweetest answer to that question, like to ever exist. You know, people would maybe say like for me, it's like Kobe, it's like LeBron, it's like Frank Ocean, but you're just
Hmm.
your family.
Yeah. Also, celebrities scare me a little, so
That's fair. Okay,
yeah,
that's fair.
yeah.
That's fair. Um, what is your hidden talent?
um,
I won't make you do it though.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. I'm really good at untangling things.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a random talent. My roommate from college would always just have me untangle all of her stuff. Like she
Hmm.
came to me whenever her jewelry was a mess.
Oh,
So,
see, I recently got into like jewelry and necklaces.
ooh,
Like
yeah.
it's the
So you
worst
know the
because I also
struggle
don't want to
then.
break it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good one. That is a good hidden talent.
Right, right.
A skill that you don't have but wish you did.
I wish that I could read other people's minds. Is that
Oh,
fair? Like a
superpower.
superpower?
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay. Now what about like talent? Like, okay, so that's
Okay,
a good
like
superpower
talent.
one.
Like talent. I wish that I could. I guess I wish I could sing. That seems like
Yeah,
something that like will always be useful to anyone who can sing, you
yeah,
know?
right. You don't have to. You could like drive around with the windows down and sing the way you want
Yeah.
to. That's a good
It's like
one.
a good party trick. Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. Be
Too.
that person too.
Yeah, just be that person. Yeah.
Um, oh, what do you miss most about pre-COVID life? That's part one of this.
Hmm.
I'm gonna throw a little second part to here. What have you gained from COVID life as well?
Dang, that's a good question. I miss um I mean, I miss being able to hang out with friends and people, but I also miss like live music a
Mm,
lot. Like that's probably the big one. Just like being able to go to concerts and be around people. And one thing I've gained, I've read a lot of books.
okay,
I've done a lot of, I think, self reflection, a lot of being able to kind of like be by myself, which
nice,
is an interesting thing and not something that I think I would have practiced before. But yeah,
good. I like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Um, 3 words to describe yourself.
Oh man. Okay, short. I would say empathetic
Okay,
and maybe just like curious.
very good.
Yeah.
And then, if you could give advice to yourself 5 years ago, what would it be?
5 years ago, I would have been 20. Um, the life, I think that I would tell myself that I have so much that I'm going to be able to create in the future, um, and to not ever stop believing that I can.
Hmm.
Um, and I think in particular, I think of changing tides when I think of this. Um, that opportunities will arise, and you just kind of got to take them and run with it. So yeah.
I love that. Well, that caps off the quick fire questions. Is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Um, no, other than just thank you for doing this podcast and being part of the crew. I think I mentioned it, but part of me being so comfortable with leaving and kind of taking a step back is knowing that people like you are going to
Hmm.
be stepping in and continuing just like that, like passion and you know, just like really, really strong and positive attitude about what Changing Tides is. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to get better at taking compliments. Thank
Uh,
you. I appreciate it a lot. And obviously, you've made it easy for building such a strong foundation for us to continue it without you. And obviously, it's nice to have you still around to help us out a little bit with little things here and there.
yeah.
But that wraps up the first interview of the Changing Tides podcast. Thank you very much. And Yeah, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Courtland, for joining us and sharing about Changing Tides and how it came to be. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, you can subscribe to our show for our bi-weekly episode releases and give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. If you'd like to hear more about Changing Tides, follow us on Instagram at LTSC_Changing Tides, or you can check out our websites, thechangingtides.org. Let's continue to change the tides on mental health.